Good morning to you, Josh Frydenberg. How do you propose the states help lift productivity?
Well, that work is already underway between the Commonwealth and the states. When we as Treasurers met recently in Canberra, we agreed, Laura, on a set of work across the fields of transport and environment and health, where we would take advantage of the Productivity Commission's extensive report called the Shifting the Dial report, which laid out opportunities to cut red tape, to develop more uniform approaches and, of course, more efficiencies, because at the end of the day we don't want to see duplication between the federal and the state governments in areas which are preventing investment and holding off the creation of new jobs.
I think there's a bit of frustration with the states as well, because they too have seen this report. I know in New South Wales, the Treasurer here has said that federation basically the relationship between the states and the federal government is broken. He's even described this as a need to break the emergency glass situation. Do you agree with him? And is it time for the federal government to support the states in abolishing inefficient taxes like stamp duty, for example?
Well, issues like stamp duty and payroll tax and land tax, they are within the domain of the states, and it's welcome that the New South Wales government is doing its own body of work, and as you know, it has its own levers when it comes to taxation and when it comes to spending, and it will make its own decisions. There is not a big bucket of money sitting at the Commonwealth level that we can just hand out to the states, so that's why we're focusing on supply side reforms, microeconomic reform, deregulation, and industrial relations and other areas where we can actually get more flexible workplaces, we can get more efficient and effective cooperation, which delivers that productivity boost, which is so important to our economic growth, to wages and, of course, jobs.
Talking about tax breaks as well to fast track some big infrastructure projects and really get some foreign capital involved here. But once again, Dominic Perrottet has said just recently that basically New South Wales, for example, is building as much infrastructure as the market can handle.
Well, there's certainly an enormous amount, a record amount of infrastructure being built across the states right now with their support, but also with record funding from the Morrison government. We have a 10-year, $100 billion pipeline of infrastructure spending, which we want to keep extending. So what we're talking about today is providing tax incentives to get more investors for nationally significant projects. These are projects that are going to be worth more than $500 million. These are projects that could be in the energy field, the water field, they can relate to telecommunications or indeed to transport infrastructure. They'll need to be ticked off by the Treasurer, and namely myself, when they meet a certain set of criteria, and then they will attract a tax incentive for doing that. And this will be the way that we as a country can remain competitive, particularly because it's expected, Laura, that there will be a $15 trillion infrastructure deficit globally by 2040. So lots of countries will be competing for the same bucket of money, and that's why we're providing these tax incentives so that money can be invested here, creating jobs and lifting wages.
Treasurer, isn't part of the problem the duplication between the federal government and the states? I mean, it does seem from time to time that, you know, the federal government leaves things to the states when it suits them, but then meddles elsewhere when it suits you politically. I'm thinking of energy, for example.
Well, just this week we had a big win in the Parliament when we passed through our big stick legislation. Now, that big stick legislation obviously has divestiture as a sanction of last resort, but it has a whole graduated set of measures which are designed to get better outcomes for consumers, whether it's in the retail market, the wholesale market or the contract market.
So how is the threat of divestiture actually good for productivity?
Well, what we have seen in the energy market is the companies taking advantage of consumers. We've seen effectively a loyalty tax. If you stay with a retailer, you get penalised than if you're potentially a new customer. And we've seen examples where companies have withheld supply and that has been done in order to lift the price. So what we are doing here is taking the advice of the ACCC, putting in place new legislation, which, by the way, was opposed in the lead up to the election by the Labor Party, and now they've backflipped and supported our legislation. That's a really important win for consumers. But we, of course, are investing in storage, which is critical as more renewables come online, and I'm thinking particularly of Snowy 2.0, which is a nation-building, groundbreaking project. But there's a whole series of other measures that we are introducing into the energy market, which, working together with the states, can deliver better outcomes, which ultimately means lower prices and a more reliable, efficient system.
We're now a couple of months down the track since we saw those tax cuts. Have they worked to stimulate the economy?
Well, they're certainly making their way into the economy. Some people are paying down their mortgage, others are spending it with tradies or at their local shopping strip. But ultimately, this is consistent with our values as a coalition, which, Laura, is to see people earn more and to keep more of what they earn. And these tax cuts, again, which were opposed by the Labor Party, are worth $158 billion over time, and what we are doing is introducing a massive reform to the tax system. We're eliminating a whole tax bracket, the 37 cents in the dollar tax bracket, and if you earn between $45,000 and $200,000, you'll pay a marginal rate of tax of no more than 30 cents in the dollar.
But has it had that stimulatory effect?
Well, it certainly had an impact in terms of the economy, and Treasury's analysis says that it will add about $8 billion a year to people's incomes, and the RBA have also said
but have
that
we
it will
seen
boost
that in the
disposable
wages
income.
growth data, or when do we start to see that?
Well, what we saw is 2.2% for wages growth. Now that's above inflation, which is tracking at about 1.6%, and indeed that's higher in terms of what we're seeing in real wages growth than what we saw when we came to government after we inherited the fiscal mess from the Labor Party. So we want wages to grow even faster, but what we have seen is a labour market that is enormously resilient. I mean, we've got unemployment today, Laura, at 5.2%. When we came to government, it was 5.7%. Yep. We have a record number of Australians in work. We've created nearly 1.5 million new jobs, and it's our AAA credit rating, the fact that we've got a balanced budget for the first time in 11 years, the fact that we have a current account surplus for the first time since 1975, and a record number of Australians in work, which is our economic record that we are proud of and that will continue to roll out as the years go by.
Are you actively considering bringing forward those second round of tax cuts then, if the first round was so successful?
Our focus is on delivering the measures that we spelled out in the budget, and when it comes to tax...
Is that a no?
Well, when it comes to tax, they were the tax cuts that we passed through the Parliament, the most significant in 20 years. Now, I'm obviously conscious that there is a staged approach to our taxes that tax cuts that we legislated, but we are focused on delivering a stronger economy, and we're always looking for opportunities to reduce taxes.
So you might revisit that then?
No, we're always looking for opportunities to reduce taxes, but what we are focused on, Laura, is delivering on what we promised in this year's budget, which was our economic plan that we took to the Australian people, and that includes a surplus, and that includes record infrastructure spending, 80,000 new apprenticeships, and this record tax cuts that we've now legislated.